Hello and welcome to another episode of our Brothers Creed podcast, where we inspire fathers to teach values that become the blueprint for the next generation. We're the Thomas Brothers, and I'm Jared.
And I'm Ethan. And today we're going to be talking about the value of camaraderie. Camaraderie is an important trait or value, principle, that I think is something that can be very valuable if utilized correctly in building your own personal creed, as well as being a father or a leader and teaching those around you this core value as well. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day.
You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it.
No retreat, no surrender.
You can't conceive of what I'm capable of!
There is no tomorrow! There is no tomorrow!
What we do in life, that goes in eternity.
So, camaraderie is, you've heard people say the word comrade, right?
Da.
Comrade, general. Did you know that comrade is actually used as like fellow socialist? At least that's
Really?
Yeah, that's one of the definitions. But of course, comrade, is like a brother in arms or someone who's gone through an experience with you. So it's kind of the derivative of the word camaraderie.
Yeah. I think that there's, and I'll go through it in a little bit too, but there are several different occasions or places where camaraderie is very likely to happen or very common. And I've had a couple of those experiences where camaraderie is just very strong. But just to dive into it a little bit, and you kind of hinted this as well, camaraderie is a mutual trust and friendship among individuals who share common interests, goals, or experiences. Camaraderie is characterized as a sense of unity, moral support, feeling of goodwill or compassion among members of a group or a team.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes those where you see camaraderie, it's camaraderie. It's when people have gone through something together, or they've spent a lot of time together. Some of the examples I think when I think about camaraderie is, do you remember after you were very young? I was in, I think, 8th grade maybe, but after 9/11.
Yeah.
But I mean, you've historically have the context, but like there was so much camaraderie among Americans because we had just gone through this like terrorist attack, alleged terrorist attack. Well, somebody was being a terrorist, whether it was
Foreign or domestic.
But we had all gone through this recent event, and everybody was kind of traumatized, and we were all like, "Hey, let's have each other's back." And so we were there was like this level of camaraderie in America that existed that maybe hadn't existed since Pearl Harbor.
And doesn't exist now.
No.
To a certain extent. As a whole, I think you do have some camaraderie amongst maybe certain political groups or faction, but I think it's much more siloed now than historically it has been. And that's really interesting. And one thing that I thought of when camaraderie, especially when you're talking about countries as well, is I spent several years in South America, in Chile, and it was really interesting because I was down there during, I think it was 2010 when they had the World Cup. And obviously it's a Latin American country, and the World Cup soccer is huge. Football is huge.
Football.
And Chile was in the running, and they were doing pretty good. But it was so funny after there would be a game, especially if Chile won, you would go out in the streets, and it was like a countrywide party. I mean, you go out, you're like in downtown, everybody in their horns honking, and it's just like everybody's yelling and screaming and partying and hugging each other. I mean, like literally the entire town. And it wasn't just that town. It was the entire country, because there was such, like, I don't know, patriotism or camaraderie between people.
That's what it's like in Philly when they have Phillies games. When
Yep.
Philadelphia wins, they literally have to go. I have some colleagues that work there. They have to grease the light poles so that people don't climb the light poles and break the light poles,
Yeah.
or get injured or whatever, because people will just go crazy and just destroy everything. Yes, the Eagles won. Let's ransack our city. You know.
Yeah. Well, but it wasn't even that. It was more of like
But
a
a celebration.
It was
I'm
more
not-
of an allegoria
Yeah.
type, more of a
Yeah.
celebration. But camaraderie is more than just a friendship as well, I think. Camaraderie is a bond that is strengthened through shared values, mutual respect, and commitment to uplift one another. And I think a lot of times camaraderie can be it's kind of built in the trenches a little bit. When people go through trials or hardships together, it builds that camaraderie. I remember when I was probably 16 or 17, you did this as well, went to a Boy Scout camp that's called Philmont. And basically it's like a 2-week backpacking trip through the wilderness of New Mexico and Arizona. And it's grueling to a certain extent. You carry all your food, you carry all your water, you're living from checkpoint to checkpoint, and you're hiking miles and miles and miles every day. And in order to do that, I remember we went on, they called them practice hikes, right? But we went on like 3 or 4 practice hikes with all of our group that was going to go. And we were all in shape and we could manage it. But really the purpose of those was not to like get us used to backpacking, but it was to build camaraderie in the group. Yeah. And I remember one time we went on one of these backpacking practices. And we went up into the Uwharrie National Forest, and it was a 2-night, 3-day hike, and it was raining and about 40 degrees the entire time. And it was
brutal.
Miserable. I mean, absolutely miserable. But, it was miserable for everyone. And I would say that was probably one of the trips that really kind of formed this bond between, I think there was like 12 of us. They were kind of all that same age, and this friendship and us kind of relying on each other, and we all had a similar goal. And that was just really that was one thing of camaraderie that popped into my head.
Oh yeah, we had similar experiences. I think that when I think about camaraderie, there's a reason why in corporate America they push team building exercises so much. I mean, you know, back during like the early 2000s, they were like really big into like team trust falls and all this kind of stuff. You know, that was like a big joke. But really, having a cohesive team and building this camaraderie among the team creates a unity that like amplifies your work. It's like, you know, the Spartans using their phalanx versus just fighting individually. It makes all the difference. In fact, working together in a unique way, that's how every general has won any war. You know, that's how Spartans won. That's how Napoleon won. That's how doing it differently. That's how the American Revolution won.
Yeah, I mean, from a corporate atmosphere, I mean, they really do try to push that camaraderie, and I feel like in some aspects it can be you can get there, but I mean,
sometimes it's forced.
You can only do so many pizza parties, right?
Yeah, it's like, hey, yeah. Well, we did fun stuff. I mean, like my team, we went out to we did like an escape room, and one time we went to do like a virtual VR like zombie killing game. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you're on my team, you got
there you go.
We have a fun time, but. Other corporations, I've seen some places it's like, hey, hot dogs in the break room, and they go and it's just like hot dogs in a metal pan. They're like, hey, this is your year-end bonus, and they're like, what?
Yeah, they're like, hey, sorry, we had record profits this year, but sorry, we didn't have enough to go around for everybody's bonus, but you know what we're gonna do for you?
Chili dogs in the break room,
boiled hot dogs in the break room.
Brutal. So I think that you know, aside from corporate America, I see camaraderie amongst some sports teams I've been on. Some of the sports teams that I've been on throughout my life have actually been the opposite examples of camaraderie to me. In some cases, they have been. Jiu-jitsu was one that you build a bond, kind of go, especially when you go to competitions with some of these guys. You know how they roll. You know the moves that they've been practicing, and then you get to see them out competing, and you're like, hey, pull that one move that I taught you, or show them that one move that you taught me, And so there's definitely some camaraderie there. One of the stories that I found that was really cool is, you ever heard of the Miracle on the Hudson? I'm sure you have.
Probably.
So this is where Captain Sully,
is
who was
where he
played by
did
Tom
this
Hanks.
crazy move where he turns
Yes.
the plane around and crashes it or something.
Yeah, so he takes off from LaGuardia Airport, which is right in New York. I think it's actually in New Jersey. And then he has a bird strike both engines. And basically both engines are dead like 5 minutes after takeoff. And he doesn't have enough altitude or engine power, for that matter, because they're both dead, to get to the nearest airport. And so he lands the airplane on the Hudson River. And he lands it very successfully. All 155 people get off safely. There's lots of ferries and stuff there that make it almost right away and help people off the boat. But it was kind of a really cool miracle. And one of the things I think is cool about this camaraderie aspect is that the people that were on that plane, Captain Sully, and then some of the rescuers, they get together every year or whenever they're able to. I think it's every year, but they took a break during COVID. And they have kind of like an event where they get together and share about each other's lives. And it's kind of like a rejoicing of life event where they come together and they talk about, I think they recently had their 12th year anniversary. Like, this is 12 years since we've had extra in this life. And
they do a memorial polar bear plunge in the Hudson River.
Well, actually, none of them hardly even got wet.
Oh, I guess they crawled out on the wings.
They were all out on the wings, standing on the wings. So most of them got like ankle deep wet. I think one or two people did jump into the water, but they didn't get that wet. And so I thought that was kind of a cool way to continue that legacy. They have these events. They will sometimes raise money for charity about like aviation safety. If there's anybody who can advocate for aviation safety, it's this group of folks, right? So I think that sometimes camaraderie can be forged in situations where people are, in tough, traumatic situations, and I think that's one of those examples.
Yeah, I completely agree. A couple of the situations that I had written down was military units. The camaraderie is really big and important in the military. Sports teams, maybe professional sports teams, where they spend basically every second of every waking hour together to a certain extent. Emergency services, firefighters, police officers, a lot of camaraderie there. Volunteer organizations, religion, and spiritual communities. A lot of times there could be a lot of camaraderie there.
Definitely.
When you have very similar values and goals. And then survival situations as well. What was what I thought about that? What was the Argentine, was it Uruguay, the people that crashed in the Andes?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I was like, how much camaraderie would your buddies eat you?
And then they ended up eating the people that died in the plane crash.
Yeah. It's so funny you thought about that. I literally just saw that video of the plane crash on TikTok today.
Yeah.
Maybe you sent me that.
I didn't send it to you, but
somebody sent it to me.
Great minds.
That was crazy.
But yeah, so that's a couple that I situations that I had. One story that as I thought through camaraderie, who's a group of people that were, tight knit, that had one cause, that had one purpose, and the camaraderie that I thought about was a group of people that were willing to lay down their lives for the greater cause, and that was our founding fathers, right? They signed their death warrant, right, with a stroke of the pen, with their Herbie Hancock, if you will, right? And they signed that declaration, and they came from very different backgrounds, all of them. Some of them didn't agree on some aspects of things, but they were all there, and they all signed this paper as the Founding Fathers in this Declaration of Independence and saying, we want to be apart. We want to be free. We want to control our own lives. And I'm sure that formed a massive bond between them, knowing that when they send this Declaration of Independence to England and they say they read all these people here, they're going to be like, hey, there's a bounty on every single one of these guys' heads.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree with you generally. I think specifically, though, there were some cases where those guys killed each other. Like, was it Burr killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel? So some of those guys...
Yeah, well, that was after the fact. That was years later.
So, but yeah, I do agree with you in that sense that they were all in it together with their sacred honor, as they said.
Mm-hmm.
One of the cool things that I thought of was how Alexander the Great would use camaraderie to to forge this loyalty among his troops. He would lay this foundation of a relationship that would prove itself time and time again until he eventually died. So after battles, Alexander would talk with many of his troops who were wounded and ask them to tell him the stories about their individual roles in the battle or what they did and how they received their wounds. Hey, what'd you happen? Like their post-action, review, after-action review, they call it. And so by doing this, he formed this indestructible bond between his men of like, hey, look, I was doing this and I got injured like this. I mean, you ever play like a game of paintball, right? What is the first thing you do after? Oh, man, I saw you ducking over there and I was shooting over your head. I could see him coming around, And it's just like, oh, yeah, you have my back, So it creates this camaraderie, these moments, especially like these almost like battle scenarios, I think specifically for young men where they can build that. And so I thought that was a really cool quote. So one of the pieces that we wanted to talk about in our segments, in our episodes, that specifically as we focus on fathers teaching values to their children, is where can this be fostered for kids? What are some of your ideas? I know you already mentioned off some general ideas, but for children, where can camaraderie be fostered? How can we as fathers provide a space or put them in a situation where this can exist?
The first thing that I thought of was Breaking Bad. Whenever the two twin brothers, right, yeah. And one of the grandpa or whatever is like drowning the one brother in the cooler, and then the other's like looking at the other brother, and he's like, "What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do?" And his other brother was like punching him and everything else, and he's like, as they say, familia es todo, right? So fostering, like creating these situations for your children to potentially build that camaraderie within the family unit, I think is very important. That can be done by, I think, just spending time with each other, and not only spending time in, we're going to watch a movie or we're going to do this, but spending time, like, I think us growing up, we did lots of things with Dad that fostered camaraderie, things that were difficult, right? Things that were challenging, things that were like, I wouldn't have been able to do this without my team, right? Yep. And I still feel today, there are very few people on this. I remember I went whitewater rafting with Dad. This was, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, and you weren't there, but Dad and I were in this in a raft, and we were in like a smaller raft, and I was like, man, I can't imagine, like, there are very few people in this world that I would trust to be like on the front or the back of this raft with me. If I needed to get out of a hairy situation, or if we needed to, okay, paddle, or we needed to turn upstream and paddle upstream or something like that. Like, there are very few people that I would trust wholeheartedly, that all I have to do is say, let's go, and we'll look at each other and we will accomplish the task, right? And it's not like, oh, I don't know, or I don't this or that or whatever. It's like, we'll do it.
Yeah.
And And that's camaraderie.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I think a lot of those are built in. Remember one time we were hiking. Hiking into camp in Linville Gorge.
Oh, yeah.
And it's this big gorge in North Carolina in the mountains. And you hike down into the bottom of the gorge, and then we were hiking along the river at the bottom, and then we hiked out the next day or 2 days later. But when we hiked in, we got there late, and it was raining, and it was dark, and we had picked a trail called the
Salty Flats.
Yeah, the Salty Flats or Sandy Flats or whatever it was.
Yeah, it was a Sandy Flats.
And we were like, oh, that's going to be easy. Hike in, at night or whatever.
It's a flats.
So we hike in. It was not flat. I mean,
Well,
it was
the ranger said, "Are you
well,
sure?"
well, no, that was the next day. That was because we didn't go to the ranger station whenever we came. Whenever we went in, because it was dark and the ranger station was closed. So we get there. It's raining. There's some points to that trail where we had to take our backpacks off. We had to lower our backpacks down with rope and then climb down. And we were like, man, are we sure we're on the right trail or whatever? But we ended up getting down to the bottom. And 2 days later, when we hiked out, we went to the ranger station, and we were like, oh, yeah, we hiked in on the Salty Flats or Sandy Flats.
Yeah, yeah.
And the ranger was like, no, you didn't. And we were like, yeah, we did. It was dark. It was raining. So we decided not to, the ranger station was closed. So he was like, that's like one of the steepest trails east of the Mississippi. And we were like, oh, whoops. And so just situations like that, creating environments. Obviously, that was kind of a mistake environment, but it was tough, and we did it.
Yeah, I think so. When I think about kids and how to build that camaraderie, I think probably one of the most go-tos is sports teams, where you're working as a team and you're competing soccer, football, basketball, ultimate frisbee. I mean, there's lots of different ones. I think individual sports like golf or wrestling, I mean, they can also build camaraderie because your teammates are also competing, or a track, But I think it's less so than when you have a sports team. I think other school, not just sports though, I think other school programs like debate club or band,
DECA,
orchestra. I mean, DECA to some extent. I think there's other. You think about if you're in a play with some folks, that would also build camaraderie. So there's lots of different things, opportunities out there for you to put your kids in ways to build camaraderie. One of the best that I think we've been in is individually going like outside of, well, first of all, scouting. I think scouting has been a big opportunity for that. But then outside of scouting as just a family, going camping, going on hard things. I mean, I remember doing a wilderness survival with a bunch of guys. We were doing the wilderness survival merit badge with a bunch of guys. And one guy put his lean-to over a poison ivy patch. And another guy put his lean-to over an ant pile. And my poison ivy was, and my lean-to was kind of in like a little thing. And we were just huddled in there with, you have to basically go out there and just build your own little lean-to. And you have like a poncho and you stay out night. You stay and sleep overnight out in the woods. And, that was my favorite one. And it's cool because it built this camaraderie. You're like, oh, man, like, how'd you sleep last night? And, like, how was it for you? And this is how it was for me. And you're, like, helping each other out or whatever, And so it kind of builds that kind of team environment, especially when you're suffering. I mean, I think I remember those times when it was snowing and we went camping, or when it was raining. Those are the times you almost remember the most because you're all kind of there suffering together.
Yeah, I completely agree. Lastly, kind of for me, I had put together some of the benefits of camaraderie.
Yeah.
And these were some of the ones that I'd picked out. I think one of them is increased morale. If you have good camaraderie, then you're constantly encouraging each other and everything else. I think that can kind of go the opposite direction too, because sometimes if you have like a sour apple in the group, then it can kind of poison the well for everybody else. But I think good, healthy camaraderie can build a positive supporting atmosphere, increase morale, enhance team performance. I think a team that a family that prays together stays together, right? A team that practices together and they like each other, they're going to do better. They're going to perform better. Stress reduction. I think just having a kind of a net or a family or people to rely on that know that supports you helps to reduce stress. Improve communication, the trust and understanding with a group kind of fosters communication, which is good. Higher resilience, and then that kind of goes into higher resilience. Kind of goes into a quote that I have for later.
Okay.
And then the last one is it encourages innovation.
Yeah.
This kind of goes with a lot of times at work, right? They're like, oh, we want to collaborate together, which is good because I think a lot of times you get people together in meetings that have different opinions, different ideas, different experiences, and you can get some pretty innovative ideas and solutions to problems that if I was just trying to tackle the problem by myself that I wouldn't have maybe thought of. So some of the benefits of camaraderie.
Yeah. I like that. Those are good. Well, let's do our. We're going to share a quote about camaraderie, and I guess I'll share mine first if that's okay. So mine is by a little known guy named Genghis Khan.
Oh,
basically
little known posterity.
Yeah, like the whole world has almost descended to him. So I think this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where if we suffer together, then oftentimes that's where camaraderie is built. So he said, when it was wet, we bore the wet together. When it was cold, we bore the cold together. And that's it. So I think that just simple quote says a lot about, like, he experienced those same things as his men, and that forged them together, whether through wetness or through cold or whatever heat. All these elements that they're being thrown at them, they were all in it together, and that's what built them together as a strong team. So love that quote.
I like it. My quote is simple, but I think you're going to like it because you've used this quote before, right? So the quote is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think this is an excellent representation of what camaraderie can be. Sometimes it's good to go fast, right? But a lot of times it's better to go far and accomplish more. And together you can go far. I love that. I think it's so true. I have seen in my life times where just having that camaraderie has helped to improve my day, my morale, my financial situation, my being able to rely on someone, but also knowing that someone is relying on you is a huge responsibility. And I think that's something that as fathers we can teach our kids in small doses at first, right? But then later on as they get a little bit older, right? Right now my 9-year-old is starting to mow the grass by himself. And he can mow the grass, and
nice.
His little brother will go around and pick up the stuff or move the trash cans or do whatever. And then once we get to the point to where the 7-year-old can mow the grass, then I'll teach the 9-year-old, or at that time 10, 11-year-old, to use the weed eater. And then I'll say, hey, you guys go out, you do it together, figure it out together,
yeah,
and build those bonds together. And so that's what I feel about camaraderie.
Love it. Well, this has been a great episode, a great review of a critical virtue that should be a part of any young person's life and any man's life. And I think the best way, one of the themes of our podcast is not only teaching our kids these things, we're both fathers of 4 kids, but it's living these principles. As we live them and model them to our kids, that will be the best way to teach them. So with that, thank you for joining, and let's build our creed together.
All right, let's do it.